Hallelujah. So we're here to discuss and talk about the book of Daniel in the next 4 weeks. I've spoken about this book to several students in different locations around England, and I like to share some thoughts and views about the book of Daniel. And the reason why we were looking at the book of Daniel today is very simply is because it's about a man who thrives through a time when there is total hardship. It's almost like the times that as Christians today when we are going through the UK and there is so much stuff that is going on. How do Christians act in reference to what is going on in this world today? And I love this book because it just enlightens everything that we ourselves in terms of principles will learn today. So I'm going to read from Daniel chapter 1. We're not actually going to get into the verses too much today, but what we're going to do in the next 45 minutes to an hour is very simply try to understand the things that come around Daniel himself. Why does God take the remnants of a country like Israel and puts them in a place of destitute, and puts them in a place where they are completely under another authority for the very first time in history? It's one of the saddest times in history, but God still leaves a remnant, and the remnants of good people around. And this is where Daniel projects himself at such a high level. And as Christians here today, we are to look at ourselves as projecting ourselves over and above the turmoils that is happening in our country and in the world today. So let me just read you a few verses. And I'm going to really go into this a little bit later on. But it says, in the 3rd year of the reign, this is Daniel chapter 1, of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into the hands with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So we're going to start trying to understand a little bit about Daniel and the Old Testament as well. I really believe that tonight that we begin our studies, we will embark on a great adventure. And I don't know about you, but I'm into adventure. I love adventures. And Daniel, I guess, is the Old Testament what Revelation is to the New Testament. Daniel is the book of the Old Testament that sweeps from time of crisis in Judah history to the second coming of the Messiah. So when you look at the book of Daniel, it's right in the center. You've got Genesis, then you've got Daniel almost right in the center, and then you've got the book of Revelation. And we will see that Daniel gives us a panoramic view of history of the world, and it really has everything to do with the added time and its intensity as a practical book. It's a practical book, and we're going to learn some practical things through it. You know, Peter had an important part of the Apostle Peter had an important word for us. Peter said that in 2 Peter, he said, seeing that you know all these things shall come to pass, what manner, he says, of person ought you to be? And I think that's a great truth of the book of Daniel. For Daniel gives us the panoramic of history of the world. In the consummation and in the very panoramic view lies the motivation to living that is very important to every one of us as Christians. And if there's anything that drove his roots deep, it is because his faithfulness, now listen to this, his faithfulness for 80 years of ministry and his commitment. 80 years of faithfulness, 80 years of coming, I mean, let's put this in the Christian point of view, 80 years of coming to church, 80 years of committing himself, 80 years of being the person that he ought to be. And in a pagan society, we are now in a pagan society. And so in this pagan society, we're going to see some things that we find we have battles in our lives. We have all sorts of battles coming to us, whatever streams they come at, whatever transmissions they come at. We have battles, but we'll see how Daniel, he kind of like broke through those battles and he was put in a great position in his pagan society. And also, if we are in secular work, this is the greatest thing. We often think that because we are in secular work, we cannot make a difference to our society. But let me tell you something. Daniel was in a pagan society, and he was in secular work. And, don't ever disregard your secular work, because you are the light in that secular work. You are the person that brings forth the light that disperses the darkness that is around you. And I know that also by being a person who has been in business for some years before I ever went into full-time ministry. So Daniel has two parts, and these are the two parts that I want to get through to you today. And it's going to be somewhat detailed, I'm afraid, but I'm a detailed guy, but don't really let that put you off a little bit, but it will be foundational, it will be a little bit comprehensive, but I hope, and also we'll be learning about Daniel's prophecies later on in this month. Daniel has two parts. One is the prophet of Daniel himself, and the other part is his prophecy. So we have the prophet himself and we have the prophecy. The man and his message. You know, the greatest thing about being a Christian is not you being a Christian. The greatest thing you being a Christian is you being the message of the Christian. And what message do you portray to the people that you see? You see, the fact of the matter is this, is that, people are always watching us as Christians. They're always looking at us in one way or the other. And as we see here, we'll see a man who was a prophet, but also we'll see in terms of his prophecy as well. You might say in connection with this man is here and now, and in connection with the message, it is then and there. And so Daniel is really two parts. Chapter 1, if you look at chapter 1 through to chapter 6, deals with the man. And chapter 7 to chapter 12 deals with the message. So we will be dealing with the man, and we will be dealing with a little bit of the message, although we cannot do everything in full terms. I've got 20 hours of teaching material on this that I've prepared, and I'm trying to get it all in 4 hours, which is not always easy. And although there is also an overlap between the prophet and the prophecy, it seems to be a major thrust. There is also in the beginning of Daniel's book, also throughout the book, is a look at the spiritual truth that is drawn from an uncompromising lifestyle of Daniel in a Jew that is in exile, which withstood an onslaught of pagan, heathen, Babylonian society. Now, some of you may say to yourself, well, you're talking about a man, and I don't understand what's going on around this man and what's going on around the history of the Jewish time at that time. And that's what I want to do this evening, is explain a little bit around the man himself and what was going on around the man. And then we will thrust into it next week and the week after that into actual him himself and how he came through it all. At the same time, Daniel has a vision, and he interprets dreams that lays out at our feet an incredible comprehension of the future of the world until Jesus comes. Now, to me, any person who's given a gift who can interpret or have a vision for the future, for me is as a person who's incredibly gifted, but also a person who has incredible tolerance as well. I certainly wouldn't want the gift of the future, to be honest with you. But some people have got the gift of the future, and this is Daniel himself. So he gives in his book an incredible insight of what the future is going to be, and he marries that up very carefully with the book of Revelations. And if you want to hear more about the book of Revelations, you can go onto our website. It's all in there as well. With Daniel, it's dreams and then it's daily living. It's all here, and it shows how the man who sees the future can live in the glory of God in the present. So it's a man that's got his head in the clouds, but it's also a man that's got his feet on the floor. And lots of people have their heads in the clouds and want to do all sorts of things and all this kind of stuff, but they never have their feet on the floor. But this man, as we will see, he has a balance in his life. And it's great when you have that balance, when you know that God is with you and your head's in the clouds and you have vision and you have dreams, but also at the same time, You can have your feet on the floor and you can run, and you know that lifestyle. You know, I still in this church have to baptize the teenagers. I still have to bury the elderly, and I still have to dedicate the children. I still have to have my feet on the ground, but I know God is in charge. Amen? Daniel has his feet on the ground, and you might say his head in the clouds. But with Daniel, it's dreams. It's dreams, and then it's daily living, and it's all here and there and everywhere. But we will see how balanced the guy is. Now, generally speaking, let me give you the setting of Daniel in the Old Testament. The Old Testament, at least in the Jewish mind, was divided into three parts. There were books known as the Law, and these were the 5 books: Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and the law of the Torah. Then there was the prophets, and the prophets were summed up everywhere, from Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Now, it's really funny, because in the Jewish thinking, you see, they didn't see Daniel as a prophet, as a major prophet. And yet, we know today in our thinking, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and Daniel are all seen as major prophets today. So he was omitted from the Jewish writings in the early days. So Isaiah, and obviously let's not forget Jeremiah, wrote the book of Lamentations as well. Ezekiel, and then all the minor prophets, and the minor prophets don't mean they're small or tiny. Some people, there's very little written about the minor prophets, but there were people like Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. I didn't memorize all that. I've got it written here. All of those were minor prophets as well. So Daniel was kind of omitted out of that. He was not seen as one of the guys that were the main guys in terms of the prophecies. Now you may see these 4 guys, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, had major parts to play in terms of what they prophesied, and at certain periods before what we call is Israel in its captivity. Let's just quickly show you, and hopefully the camera can catch this. But as you know here, and some of you probably know a little bit about Bible history, this is the time when Solomon reigned, and when the 12 tribes of Israel split up. The 12 tribes of Israel were manifested in the land of Canaan, and they all had land and everything. But this was the saddest time in Jewish history. 930 BC, and there were 2 guys, one guy called Jeroboam, the other one called Rehoboam, and the 12 tribes split up. Now, 2 of those tribes went to the south, and 10 of those tribes went to the north. I want you to keep that in mind. When we're talking about the book of Daniel, we're talking about the south, which is called Judah. And there you will see the main prophets in Judah: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel. So I hope that gives you an idea that even before that, before we have the flood, we have Exodus, we have the conquest of Canaan, we have Samuel 1 and Samuel 2. You remember Eli and all those guys, Hophni and Phinehas. We have King Saul, a king that God didn't want, but the people wanted. Then we had David, and all that kind of stuff went on. But then when Solomon came along, everything was going pretty well, not too bad. And then the 12 tribes that God wanted on this nation had split up. And it was the saddest, and as we're going to read some of the prophets here, the saddest thing that ever happened in the time of Israel. And that's where Daniel comes in. This is when the enemy comes in, a Babylonian power comes in, and then starts, for the very first time in Israel's history, takes over Israel. But whether or not the Jewish people put Daniel in this list of prophets, one thing we know is that in the Bible you'll find him listed amongst the prophets, the major prophets in our Bible today. He has been traditionally classed as what is known as a major prophet. So we have the major prophets. We have Isaiah, we have Jeremiah, we have Daniel, and we have Ezekiel, all there as terms in terms of the major prophets. And we will see that there are different times in terms of deportation, in terms of them going into Babylon. And as we've read, I don't know if you've really studied the first verse of Daniel and you've really looked at it in a good way, but we will go back to that in a moment, because you will see in that first verse there's mentioned two kings, Jeroboam and also Nebuchadnezzar. And that's interesting. Why is there mentioned two kings? Well, we'll get to that soon, or we'll get to it next week. We'll see. But Daniel finds himself associated with these great guys. And Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel are the four known, as we've said, the major prophets. Now, we need to understand how Daniel fits into those four guys. Now, it's very important to understand this. You see, God doesn't call prophets for nothing. A prophet isn't called because it's a good idea by God and he's placed in a place where he has to minister to everybody else and everybody comes against him. A prophet is placed in a place where he has to defend God's virtues. And it's very important to understand that. So God puts certain men, and if you read every book, if you study those books very carefully, and they're not easy books to study sometimes, you'll see they had a role to play. For example, we have Isaiah. He ministered more than 100 years before the Babylonian exile. So if we look here carefully, I hope you can all see this. Here we can see there's the Babylonian exile. So Isaiah was prophesying almost 100 years before that exile ever happened. So you can imagine, he's there, he's with the people, he's shouting to the people, and he's saying this is going to happen. Now it was perfect, it was peaceful, it was like, there was tranquility in the land, there was nothing going wrong, but he says, listen, because there was idolatry creeping, and idolatry can mean many things in our lives today. It was creeping in. There were things coming into the system, the Christianity system. The world was coming in. All sorts of things were coming in. And Isaiah, the prophet, stands up. And, when a prophet stands up, or a pastor stands up, or a priest stands up, and he quotes the word of God, and it niggles you, you see, people get defensive. Don't they? And you see, Isaiah, 100 years before, he had a hard job to do, because 100 years before he was saying this is what's going to happen to Judah. Can you imagine that? A man standing up and saying all those things, and everybody laughing at him and thinking about him in a different way. But he ministered in Judah, and Judah, obviously the southern kingdom. And remember, after Solomon had died, those kingdoms had split. So people were a bit concerned about Isaiah ministering as he did during that time. So Isaiah was proclaiming the fact that one day judgment would come upon Judah. Now this is key, because judgment, as far as they were concerned, was almost like a mini Armageddon. In fact, Daniel is like a mini Armageddon. It's almost like the book of Revelations, but it's a mini type. It's almost a shadow of what's going to happen in the book of Revelations, as we will see maybe in the next few weeks. So there was Isaiah 100 years before. Then you've got Jeremiah, and Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, as some of us know. That's why he wrote the book of Lamentations. He was a bit melancholic, Every time you spoke to him, he cried. I mean, you just read the book of Jeremiah, and you'll find those things out. Read Jeremiah chapter 12, and you'll see where one day Jeremiah was complaining to God about all these things. Has anybody ever complained to God before? Well, he was just complaining and moaning and groaning, and he was saying, why is all the non-Christians getting away with everything, and I'm not getting away with anything? He was getting very upset, and then God's put it, and I'll paraphrase this, he put it like this: look, if you can't run with horses, how on earth are you ever going to run with chariots? I mean, how are you going to ever keep up when real persecution comes upon this land? So Jeremiah came sometime after Isaiah. Jeremiah wasn't 100 years before but he was coming towards. I reckon he had the hardest job, because he was coming towards the end of the time when all the people were going to be deported back into Babylon. And that's sad, because when you're a part of the person who is telling the people, if you don't change, if you don't turn, if you don't come away from your sins, if you don't do the things I'm telling you to do, then there's going to be issues and there's going to be problems. And if you don't listen to me, and he was right there at the brink. So Isaiah, he was gone, he was out now. And Jeremiah was right at the brink when the Babylonians were coming on. The enemy started to come along. He was the prophet right at the end. And he saw the things that Isaiah began to see coming in full fruition. So he saw those things that Isaiah saw. He understood the things that Isaiah was seeing. So it was imminent for Jeremiah. He had a hard time. And then we have Ezekiel. Ezekiel and Daniel. Well, Ezekiel and Daniel, you know, I think they are peers because, as we will see in the book of Ezekiel, he mentions Daniel several times. But so Ezekiel, what about Ezekiel? Ezekiel prophesied to a group of exiles in Babylon. So we have that period almost where they're getting deported, and Ezekiel is ministering to those who are getting deported. Isn't it great that how God uses us in different time scales? It doesn't matter what we are, what stage we are, you know, in life. God will put someone godly in a place to help us and to sort us out in some way or the other. And it's Jeremiah imminent at the captivity. It's Ezekiel during the captivity, ministering to a group of exiles, captive in Babylon. And I guess maybe that's why Ezekiel's message tends to be more hopeful. And closing part of his book presents glorious of the kingdom to come, giving hope to that sad and exiled people. So Ezekiel was much more hopeful in his message when he was giving it. And then we come to the guy that I want to expose to you in the next few weeks, and that's our good old Daniel. Daniel ministered during the exile period also, but not from the vantage point of moving amongst his people, but the vantage point of being a ruler in the Babylonian society. Listen to me, folks. This is very important to understand, right? He was in the society. He wasn't outside the society. He was in the society of the Babylonian society. So he was in there making a difference. So do you know you can make a difference from inside out? Do you know you can change things in your society? We're all on the outside, preaching to the guys from the outside in. But Daniel, he was promoted in the Babylonian society, and he was preaching from the inside out. Big difference, all right? So you can make a difference. So if you are in your schools, if you're in business, if you're in your job, it doesn't matter where you are, you can make a difference from the inside out. You can have an effect. He was a Jew in the midst of the world power of the Babylon, but he was not only in the midst of Babylon, but also there was another group of people who came along. So what we have here, we have the Jews who are taken over by the Babylonians. Then we have the Babylonians who then are taken over by the Persia-Medos. So a Persian society. And may I move further? I'm jumping ahead here, but I will say this. Then the Persians were taken over by the Greeks, and the Greeks were then taken over by the Romans when Jesus came. Are you with me? Okay. So as well as we see that when we study this book, there are four great world powers. The Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. But this is during the time of the Babylonians and the Persian Empire at that time. What excites me is that he was there through the great period of the Babylonian Empire, even to Cyrus, who was a king, who was a great monarch, and the Medo-Persian Empire. His position was the ruler in the pagan world. And from the vantage point, he was God's man in a pagan society. We want God's women and men to be in pagan society. That's the key thing for everything we do in this world. We want them to be in the parliament. We want them to be in management. We want them to be in. We want them to clean the floors in big buildings. We want them to be carpenters. We want them in society. And we need them in society. So we see the distinction between the placing of these major prophets. Now, Daniel really zeroes in on the sweep of human history. He particularly speaks of a time which is called the time of the Gentiles. I want you to grab hold of this. The Bible says that there was a time of the Gentiles that would dominate Israel. The time of the Gentiles that would dominate, that was what is said in the prophecies, that there was a time when Israel, they would think the Jewish people would never ever be dominated. But this is the time of the Gentiles that come in, and they have started to dominate the people of Israel. Now don't forget, these were God-fearing people. These were the guys who were David and Goliath, David, Solomon, all those guys. Well, these were God-fearing people. And now you will find that the Jews themselves, slowly but very littly, they turn to idolatry, they turn to other gods, they turn to all sorts of things. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. And you will see that the Bible says that there was this time of the Gentiles. The time began at the captivity when Israel was taken out of the land and removed to a place called Babylon. And we'll explain what Babylon means, because we've read already there was 2 kings, and we'll see more about that in a minute. That time will end when Jesus comes back. The time of the Gentiles ended when Jesus came back. If I had enough space, which I don't, I would give you a graph in showing you that the time of the Gentiles was going to end when Jesus was going to come back. You might say in chapters 1 to 6, you might say you have a historic night, and 7 to 12 you have a prophetic light. And I believe there are 4 main purposes to this book as we unwrap it. First of all, Daniel focuses on the true dedication to God, what God means. You can't help but see in the book of Daniel that Daniel makes a tremendous commitment to God and nothing changes it. He never is a victim of his circumstances. When you explore this, when you look at him, you look at his character, you can't see him fazed by anything. I mean, he doesn't come into church and moans and groans. Like none of us moan and groan, do we? But he doesn't moan or groan. He doesn't come in. He's not suffocated by the world that's around him. He doesn't say, "Oh, this happened," or "This happened." "Oh, I've got a backache here, and I've got this," and you read about him, and you read the things he does. You can't see any of that with him. God blesses, and God always does this. I've been a Christian for over 45 years now, and I know God always blesses a committed person. Someone who is committed to God continuously, no matter what they've done, they are always become blessed. And God blessed Daniel. I mean, you can't believe what happened to Daniel because he's committed to God. God just pours out blessing on him, continuously pours out blessing on him. And so it's a tremendous message of dedication of God. Just put this in a practical form. We came here 10 years ago in this building here. It was a shipwreck when I came into this building. And it was quite horrible. And you see around this building now, you'll see buildings being resurrected outside. We're a praying church. We've been praying for a very long time. We've really got into prayer, and we've really got into seeking God for this area around us, And in the last year, we've had favor after favor after favor after favor. People are doing things for us in our church. The builder's come in this week, and he said, can I paint your minor hall? £6,000-7,000 worth of work to be done, and he's just offered to do it for free. You see, God brings favor to people who are committed. And I'll tell you something. I know in my life I've been committed to God for 45 years, and I've tried not to waver. So commitment to God, commitment to church, commitment to the Bible, commitment to prayer always pours out blessing. And you will see it happening over and over again. Secondly, Daniel is a book about God's care for Israel. I love this because it's one thing about being a Christian. You need to care for the people that you're ministering to. Some people think that when Israel went into captivity, God turned his back against them. And you can imagine that when something goes wrong around you, you think God isn't there. God doesn't love you. Have you been in that position before? Or is it just me? God isn't there. He doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't care for me anymore. He's not there for me anymore. Now, the people of Israel may have thought that themselves. But think about it. The people are deported from their own land, Jerusalem, the Holy Land. And God takes them out of Jerusalem, and he puts them in a land called Babylon. And if I explain to you what Babylon is, he puts them may I put it in this way, he puts them in an evil land. But out of the remnants of God's grace, he puts Daniel in a high position. And what is amazing about this, and what really it's bringing tinkles down my back right now. What gets me about this, how God works in the prophetic and how God works with His grace, He always gives somebody a chance to hook back into Him. And Daniel was that man for the people of Israel. And God made sure that they had a representative right in the middle of the Babylonian government. And He picked Daniel, and Daniel was Israel's man in the White House at that time. Not Donald Trump, it was Daniel at that time. Daniel was there always to defend the people because God cared, even in the time the people were being punished. Isn't that good? Isn't that wonderful? And so Jewish interest was always in the heart of God, always in the heart of God. Christian interest is always in the heart of God. There's always a get-out clause with God. God always wants you to come back. God always wants you to hook into Him. There's always somebody around that God will put in front of you that you can hook into. And God always wants to show His grace to you. And so even though they were in captivity, even though they were in bondage in a foreign land, even though they lost their existence as a national entity, God still loved them. He still cared for them. And in fact, in 17 years of captivity, in all God allowed, and then He took them back after 70 years of captivity. He loved them so much that He still took them back. And even during the captivity, He allowed them to live in peace. And that's amazing. Have a special man in a very high place to care for them and to give them hope. And through that man, Daniel, he gave tremendous prophecies of what he was going to be like in the future for God's people when their captivity was turned into glorious liberty. It's amazing, isn't it? Even this man, even though he was put in a great position, he would prophesy to the Jews and said, this is what's going to happen. This is your future. This is the victory. This is, if you listen to me very carefully, I have got your answers in this book. And that was his hope to the people. He gave them hope. He preached it every day and every night. And I'm just wondering if we are like that. When people have no hope at all, what do we actually do? Do we actually tell them about Christ? Do we tell them that there's hope in Christ? I pray we do. I pray that we are people like that. The third element of the book of Daniel is that it is a tremendous message of comfort for the Jews. And I think that's very important because one thing in turmoil, I know one thing, if you're ever in turmoil or things are not going quite right, you need to know there is comfort and there is peace and there is confidence in God. Daniel is a book of comfort. It is. It just oozes out confidence. It was terrible being punished in a pagan land. I understand that. And you could easily forget about God, and you could easily dismiss God, and you can easily say, I don't care about God. But God continued to give them a message through Daniel. And not only through Daniel, but He also gave them a message even through Ezekiel as well. He gave them the message of comfort. Something is going to happen. Something is going to make things even better. And I think that's a principle that we need to grab hold of today. And finally, Daniel is given to us to lay out the story of how the world is going to end. Now, that's the biggie. That's the biggie in this book, because to know how the world's going to end is quite crucial, and it's something we can read, and as Christians we can be confident in. What a tremendous book! It's a book that tells us about the dedication to God and how God rewards that with blessing. It is a book that tells us about the love of God for His people, Israel. It's a book that tells us about the hope for the future for those who are in captivity. And it's a book that tells us how the world is going to end. Tremendous book. Are you going to read it when you get home? I hope so. You'll start to read it. And I pray you do, and you will see something that is absolutely magnificent. Now, I've got to say this. There are scholars, and me being a person who's studied a little bit, there are people who have dismissed the book of Daniel in the Bible, and this is a controversial issue with quite a few people. And the reasons why they dismiss it Well, there are several reasons. Basically, it's because of this. It's because of a modern rationalism. In other words, what they're thinking, they think it has to be rationalized. Because one of the things that Christians even find hard is about miracles and about prophecy. And the book is full of miracles and prophecy. And when you think about miracles and prophecy, and I've seen thousands of miracles in my lifetime, I've seen hundreds of prophecies. I've heard hundreds of prophecies in my lifetimes. You can start to rationalize it. You can try to humanize it. And the thing about this book is that a lot of scholars have looked at it, read it, thought to themselves, no, this can't be true. This is just a fairy story. You know, this is absolutely, you know, this can't be right. You know, and simply is because they're trying to rationalize it, and they're trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And usually, if you think about it, if we're trying to rationalize this, then we're trying to rationalize Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ was full of prophecy. He was full of miracles. And so, you know, if there aren't miracles in your life, then, you know, we need to ask ourselves, why isn't there miracles? You know, one thing that stirs me up for all my life, the reason why I'm in ministry today, is because of the miracles that I've seen. I know God is around, and miracles are a very important thing. And Daniel is full of miracles, because if there are miracles and predictions of the future, then there's something beyond the human mind. It's beyond the human mind. If I came to church and I just listened to a message every week, and it wasn't beyond the human mind, I would say to myself, I'd rather go to a social club, or I'd rather go to a place down the road, you know, and do something different. But if I come to church and I know that it's beyond the human mind, I know that things I'm learning are beyond the human mind, then it changes me completely. It makes me rethink everything else. The Bible says that we should set our mind on things above, not on this earth. Things above. And the whole book of Daniel is all about setting your mind on things above, not just on this earth. Now, it's exciting times. Exciting times. Let me tell you what the exciting times are. Now, when you come to Daniel, you're going to get thrilled as we go through this, because you will see miracle after miracle. You'll see prophecy after prophecy. And that's why the book is so important to myself personally. And if you're going to destroy the validity of the Bible, then Daniel has to go. And that's why the attack on Daniel is relentless with some scholars today. Daniel needed credentials, and the time of the people might know that he was the man of God. The only way that you will ever know that you are a woman or a man of God is by the credentials of what God does through you. Is that not right? It's not because of what you know. You know, when you go to heaven, you know the first thing that God will ever ask you? He won't ask you simply what you know. He'll ask you what you did. And you know, and you got to, and we're all got to be subjected to that. He won't ask you, you know, did you get baptized in? Did you get fully immersed in water? Did you get sprinkled with water? You know, would he ask you all those kind of questions? Did you get dedicated? Were you undedicated? Were you, you know, he won't ask you any of those things. You read the Bible very carefully. He'll ask you, what did you do? And then you can say to him, well, then he'll say, are you a good and faithful servant? You know, did you do the very things that I asked you to do? Did you use my giftings in 1 Corinthians 12? Did you use all those 9 giftings? Did you use the one of miracles? You know, one of the gifts of miracles is and we could go into that, but I'm not going. It's going to be too long to go into that. But one of the gifts of miracles. So there was miracles. Listen to this. There was miracles in the pagan Babylonian society. So even in pagan times, there was miracles, and that's exciting. They tried to find the fault with him, and they couldn't find one except he was so committed to his God. So you can imagine a man that was totally committed. They couldn't find any fault. They tried to find a fault with him. They tried to find something wrong with him, but they could not find anything wrong with him. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar said finally, this king, he said, your God is the God. I agree, Daniel. He said, your God is the God, not my God is the God. He said, your God is the God, because of the miracles of Daniel's life. It's incredible. And even in your life today, I want to challenge you here. Even in your life today, you should think, is there miracles going on in your life in pagan society? Can you may say, well, they don't allow miracles in my work. It's not up to them, by the way. It's up to you. Let me give you an example. When I was in work 14 years ago, and I was praying and in my workplace, and the CEO came up to me and he said, we have to look for about quite a few £1,000 to stop making people made redundant. And I said, oh, okay. And I don't know why he mentioned it to me, but I said, okay. But I was reporting to him. I was the policy director at that time. And I remember vividly praying about this. I said, Lord, if we can not make people redundant, it would be a great thing. Give me some wisdom. Give me a Daniel spirit. Give me something that I can do or say, And then something came into my mind. And it was the word facilities. And I remember this vividly. I picked up the phone and I rang the facilities department and I said, hello. And he said, hello. I said, hello again. He said, hello. I didn't know what to say to him, so I said, hello again. He said, hello back. And then all of a sudden I just said, facilities, He said, yes, that's who we are. I said, okay. I said, how's it going? He said, it's going fine. I said, okay. I said, and I still didn't know what to say. And I said, so what's happening? He said, nothing much happening. I said, okay. And I just knew I had to continue the conversation of rubbish to him and him replying back to me. And then eventually it came to me as he was speaking, and then he started to speak about the buildings and the buildings made redundant, the buildings that he had that were redundant and things like that. And I said, well, how many buildings do you have redundant? He said, well, we have quite a few. The penny dropped. And then I went to see my CEO, and I said, we got so many buildings in our company that aren't used, And the money that we were talking about saving, we sold all those buildings, and that money, which I think it was way over 250,000, made up and stopped people being made redundant. That's the wisdom of God coming in a society. God can use you in all areas if you seek his face and you really look to him. So Daniel becomes the defense of God in this age. Daniel was the defense of God to the pagan Babylonian society, and also for the very Jews in captivity. So this has been constant message for God's people. Miracles, prophecies means God is alive and active. Isaac Newton, I read a lot about Isaac Newton. I like the guy. He said to reject Daniel is to reject the Christian religion. And I think that is so right. I mean, Isaac Newton, he's come from a Jewish background, but he knew that the book of Daniel meant something. So for the next few more minutes, I just want to go into this first few verses. Are you with me so far? Yeah? Okay, you can say yes. It's all right. Now, that was the introduction. And I want to give you just a few thoughts as in these next few minutes as to just open these two verses up that we've just read. It says, the year reign of Jeroboam, the king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Two kings. Both of them completely diametrically opposite to each other, mentioned in one verse. And the Lord gave Jeroboam, king of Judah, into his hands the part of the vessel of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessel into the treasurer of the house of his God. Now, let me explain a little bit about that to start off with. It's very important to understand what we're talking about here. Now, that's the introduction of the book. Now, you just see the names, places, and so forth, and for a minute. But the places, first of all, is important. Two places are mentioned. One place is Judah. And when we're talking about Judah, we're actually talking about the center of the Jerusalem worship, which was Jerusalem at that time, where the temple was built. And then we're talking about a place which is called Babylon. And it's very important. These two places are, if you look at them very carefully, have infinite contrast between them. Where did all the false human religions begin? You will find they began in Babylon. So these people, the Jewish people, the people of Jerusalem, the chosen people that God chose, were going to be taken out. Think about this. We're going to be taken out of their land, and they were going to be put in a place where there was simply where all the other religions were born. Isn't that a sad thing? Do you think that's a sad thing to happen? And we will also find out, because if you read the book of Revelation, especially Revelation 17, you will talk about all the human religions coming back together in the end times to consummate themselves. So where we've got the Jewish people now going into this idolatry country, which they must have been very disgusted about, in the end times, that's where all the religions will start to consummate. And we know that Babylon is a mixture of today's Iraq and Iran. It goes back to Persia. But the Babylon, the final form of evil. We know that. We already know that. And where, may I ask, is the seat of God's throne? God's throne, originally in Judah. Satan's throne, originally in Babylon. So we got this contrast in verse 1 already. Judah, in the very beginning, we see there are two very, very opposites to each other. So one is Satan's place, and the other is God's place. One is the promised land. Don't forget Judah, Canaan, the promised land, where the 12 tribes settled, and then they built the temple. And the other, where the blessing flows. So we've got a place where blessing flows, and then we've got a place which is contrast to where cursed land, where curses flow, evil spawns out of a terrible evil of Babylon society originating in the Tower of Babel back in Genesis. So one is the place of true worship, and the other one is the place where idolatry was born. So one is the house of God, and the other is the house of pagans. So you can see how dramatic it is for the Jewish people to be taken to a place of idolatry. Now, I always say this, there must have been some good people amongst the exile. They couldn't have all been bad. So you can imagine you being a person who is put into a place full of idolatry. It's like taking Christians, every church here, and lifting them up and putting them in a place of idolatry, putting them in Syria or putting them in Iraq today where they worship other gods. And so they are infinitely contrasted. How ironic, I feel, when I read this, it was. One full of sin and most despicable place on the face of the earth, and the other one was supposed to be heaven, an image of heaven. Now let's look at Judah for a moment. Let's look at this place here for Judah in a moment, in the last few more minutes. Judah was the southern kingdom after Solomon reigned. So we know that after Solomon reigned, there were two tribes. There was Benjamin, there was Judah. And in that reign, there were 19 kings. And those kings were, majority, not all of them, they were quite good kings. And you remember that amongst the people of Israel, there were 12 tribes. And the 12 tribes, when they were given the promised land, they came into the land of Canaan after leaving Egypt. So when they were in bondage, they went back to Jerusalem, which was then called Canaan. And after Solomon succeeding in ripping the land in half, and that's what he did. Solomon was a good king up to a point, and unfortunately, after he then had so many wives, and he went off with those wives, and then after he wasn't meant to marry other tribes, and they were full of idolatry. Those wives worshipped other gods, and so Solomon worshipped other gods as well, and that was the end of his life. You know, right in the beginning of his life, remember the thing that he asked for right in the beginning of his life was wisdom. Great thing. He said, I don't want anything else, I just want wisdom. And God gave him wisdom, and he used wisdom, but as wisdom, he didn't become wise at the end. He was wise at the beginning. That's why we have to maintain these and be committed to God if God's going to bless us. And it's so very important. So faithful to Jerusalem, leaves faithful to the family of David. David was the king before Solomon as well. And then you also have the northern kingdom, which we haven't talked about much here. There were other prophets in the northern kingdom here. Israel itself. And so Israel eventually, as we're going to look at later on, got taken over by another group of people called the Assyrians. But then the Babylonians took over the Assyrians and took them back into captivity. So the whole of Judah was in dismay and distorted. So when the Babylonian Empire came, it swept to the north and gobbled up everything. And that's what Satan does normally. Satan's very clever. The Bible said he kills, he steals, and he destroys. He can come into your house, and he can just gobble up everything that you could be doing for the rest of your life. You know, being a Christian all your life is a good thing, but to resurrect that spirit that Daniel has and to keep it going is essential when we read this book. And we're going to carry on next week, Monday the 14th, and we pray that everybody here will be blessed in the things that we're going to start to learn more about in terms of Daniel. Thank you.